And welcome back to the Nose Play Slay the Spire. After two unlikely but successful runs with the first two classes in the game, we are now going to try for our hat trick and see if we can't win a normal run of Slay the Spire with the third class. Third class was actually one that I didn't care for the look of at first, but he's kind of growing on me. The Defect, a combat automaton, which became self-aware. Ancient technology allows the manipulation of orbs. We start with a special item called the Cracked Core, which channels one lightning orb at the start of each combat for us. And this is what I would describe as the mage class of Slay the Spire. So if you're familiar with traditional RPGs, of like Final Fantasy and such, this would be sort of your black mage or elemental mage class of character. Not so much with the fire, but with lightning and ice and dark magic and all kinds of other cool stuff. So very, very cool character. This was actually the first character that I ever had a successful run of Slay the Spire with. And I've had several since then. So I definitely have had some powerful runs with him. He feels a little bit interesting in that, like, when you get a really solid deck going, you seem to just steamroll everything. But a lot of times it can be really hard to get the synergy with your deck, and there's a lot of opportunity to misplay, which can really put you back. So we'll see if I can get a good run with the Defect. And again, as per normal The Nose Plays content, I'm going to try to remember to verbally talk through all of my thought processes, why I'm making the decisions I'm making, and what it is we're doing. So let's first take a look at the map and see if there's anything interesting about this map. I already see one thing. Seems like there's a lot of opportunity to get more elite fights over here on this path, but it's sort of branched in a way that there's not a lot of choices to be made. So it's two elites that way. I think you can still get, yeah, you can still get two elites going the other way. So either side doesn't matter so much for that. There's two campfires, if you're willing to avoid the elite, or one campfire if you want to go for the double elites. The other side gives us two campfires into double elites before the final one. So that's interesting. And then merchants. If we go for the double elite and the double campfires, we're going to miss out on any merchants, which means we'll have a lot of gold going into next act if we make it. And that would be a great time to maybe grab an early merchant. But I'm kind of leaning towards this double campfire, double elite path. In the situation that we get to here and we're just like totally beat up and we can't take this one, we do have the alternate route that we can pivot on. And I don't see too many scenarios where I take the fiery elite because I'm really looking at double upgrading in these campfires. Rewards are better at a fiery elite, so we might consider it. But 1, 2, 3 fights, 2 question marks, a campfire to upgrade a card hopefully, and an elite feels like a pretty strong start. So that's where I'm leaning at the moment. That only took 2 minutes. Our random options for today are choose a colorless card, gain 7 max hit points, so start with a little more health. We do have one of the lower starting healths in the game with only 75 health. We're actually in between the Ironclad at 80 and the Silent at 70, so getting 7 gives us more health than a starting Ironclad. 21 damage to choose a rare card, or lose your starting relic and attain a random boss relic. We're not going to go for the craziness that this can sometimes produce. we want to sort of do a tutorial run, so we want things to be as generic as possible, at least in the early game. That means that I'm also probably less likely to take a colorless card. Colorless cards are kind of a rare occurrence, and you're not going to get a ton of colorless cards, although you will get some in every run, especially if you visit shops and you're interested in spending gold that way. So maybe we just go for the 7 max health. Give me a little bit more breathing room so that we can edge out another close victory if we have to. Not my favorite start, but I'm not sure I want to take 21 damage just for a rare card. There's a lot of really good rare cards. There's several that are hard to make work without the other prerequisite cards. Before we do begin, let's go ahead and take a look at our deck. We have 10 cards in this deck, so less than the silent. We have 4 strikes, 4 defends, and our 2 special cards interact with the orbs that we talked a little bit about briefly. Zap generates another lightning orb, and Dual Cast has a special evoke command, or evoke, I don't know what you call this, but the word is escaping me, but we'll talk about what evoke means and how these orbs work. It's a little confusing the very first time you jump in because there's not a lot of tutorial on how to use your orbs, but there are pop-ups, so when you mouse over certain things, you get a little bit of text that can guide you. But we're going to go for the health, and I think we are going to take this path and see how it goes. Alright. So, before we begin, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So this is because of our cracked core. The defect at the start of the game always begins with 3 empty orb slots. The cracked core will automatically fill our first orb slot with a lightning orb. Each orb has 2 effects, a passive effect and an evoke effect. The passive effect happens in between our turn and the enemy turn. And the evoke effect consumes the orb typically and is like a one-time trigger. And the way that we evoke an orb is by filling all of the orbs and then generating a new one. And whichever orb is in this primary first position will be evoked, typically just one time. There are some cards that will cause those to rotate or do other things, and we'll see those cards as we progress. But in this particular scenario, we have 1, and we're going to generate another one here, probably. So we got an incoming slime attack and then a debuff. I'm not super concerned about the debuff of the acid slime. We want to get rid of this guy if possible. Well, we have 2 ways to deal with him. I could defend with a block card and absorb all the damage, or we could strike him twice and just remove him from the field. So that seems like the better strategy. So let's go ahead and strike him twice. No need to play a defense card here because no attack is incoming that needs to be defended, which means we get to generate our first lightning orb with Zap. So every time we play this card, we generate a lightning orb. This is significantly slower damage-wise than playing something like a strike. What's going to happen is it's going to deal 3 damage to a random target in between our turns. The benefit is that these orbs are persistent as long as you don't evoke them, which means that I'm going to get an extra 3 damage consistently in between turns, and then I'm also going to deal 3 damage from this orb. So we are generating 6 random damage twice, or once, 3 and 3. So 3 damage twice is 6. Every single time in between turns. We're also going to get some other orb types which generate different stats, and we'll see that later on. But for now, we'll go ahead and demonstrate how the orbs work. So now I'm ending my turn, and you can see zap, zap, 2 random targets take 3 damage. So in the long run, that 1 energy could potentially produce a lot more than the 6 damage from a strike. But in this case, it's slower because it doesn't produce it up front, and we can't direct it at a specific target. So Both of those are downsides. The upside being there are ways to get a lot of benefit from generating orbs with other cards. We're about to see that right now, actually. So dual cast. What dual cast says is it will evoke your next orb, but instead of just evoking it once, it'll do it twice. And notice when I pull this card out, you can see the next orb's numbers change. That number change is showing you the evoke damage that it will deal. So a normal lightning strike between rounds is only 3, but if we evoke it, we're going to deal 8. And we're actually going to do that twice. And so when I first saw this card, I really didn't like it because it feels kind of bad to destroy your lightning orbs. But you got to remember that when you evoke something, you're going to get a lot more upfront damage. And that means that, like, if to get 15 damage on this, we have to pass the turn 5 times. This is going to deal 16 damage right now. So this is 1 energy for 16 damage. We do give up some of our tickle damage in between, but to get the same amount of damage, we would have to pass a 6th turn to actually exceed the damage that this is going to produce. It's almost always worth it to dual cast an orb when you have the opportunity, even though it consumes it, and you're not going to get the damage in between rounds anymore. So keep that in mind. There are situations where you won't want to do this, but this is our highest damage card in hand, and right now the only goal is get rid of this slime. So let's go ahead and do that. And that was just barely enough for us to clear the field in 2 turns. Very nice. Our first draw of the game. So draw is probably not the right word, but our first card of the game. First reward of the game. So every single class has sort of a theme of different cards that work well together. One of the themes within the Defects kit are zero cost attacks, and here's a really great example of 3 of those zero cost cards. Go for the eyes, deal 3 damage. If the enemy intends to attack, apply 1 weak. Beam Sail, deal 3 damage, apply 1 vulnerable stack, and Claw. Deal 3 damage, increase the damage of all Claw cards in your deck by 2 for the rest of this combat. You can see that there's obviously some synergy between all of these, and if you had a bunch of these in your deck, you could actually stack a bunch of vulnerable, stack a bunch of weak, and slowly grow attack damage with claws over and over and over again, to where in a long drawn-out fight, claws start swinging for a lot of damage for a zero-cost card. The downside is that these do not interact with our orbs very well. So the orbs are kind of a whole separate set of damage, and they don't benefit from things like vulnerable, which is unfortunate, but it makes a card like this less useful if you're focusing primarily on orbs, because only physical attack cards will interact with the vulnerable effect. So we don't have very many of those, and the ones we have are pretty poor, like strikes. We're probably going to pass on the beam cell for now. Applying weak with a little bit of damage feels a lot like the neutralized card from the Silent, and it plays very similar to that, where this could basically be used as a free defensive tactic to remove a little bit of damage we would otherwise have to block, or make it a little easier to block with the cards we have in hand. So this has some value even outside of the synergies. And then claws, if you go for enough claws early and you use them frequently, they can really become powerhouse cards, but a single claw by itself is pretty poor and not going to be particularly useful in the early game. In the early game, the name of the game is conserve health as much as possible while simultaneously getting your damage in consistently. I think that go for the eyes is the obvious pick at this point in the game. Alright, what do we get? Ooh, okay. Very interesting. This is a cool little event that sometimes happens in Act 1. we get our option from the 3 faces of the living wall. One of these will let us pass, but we have to do whatever they say. And all of these are pretty much a positive for our deck. We can remove a card from our deck if we have too many of a card or a card that we don't like maybe a curse that we picked up. This is a good choice. Transform a card in our deck, takes a strike or defend and turns it into something else, or upgrade a card in our deck. Let's take a look at what our possible upgrades would be. One that I really like is the Zap. Making the Zap a 0-cost card has some cool synergies and just makes it easier to play. Because it is such a slow card, having no energy cost really does make it a lot more palatable. Dual Cast is another one that gets a energy reduction when you upgrade it, so this becomes a lot easier to play. It's less useful to upgrade this unless we have a more reliable way to generate orbs to then evoke. Only having one orb generating card right now means there are going to be times where we draw this, and even if it's 0 cost, if we haven't gotten this card back in hand, we might not be able to use it because our orbs might all be gone. And then last but not least, the card we just picked up, 4 damage for 2 weak, is pretty good, and this is a much more defensive play. We could also go for just randomly getting a new transformation on one of these 2 types of cards. Just something else that's better than a strike or a defend to play with. I kind of like the transform the best here. And I kind of like transforming a strike card right now because we do have some offensive cards in hand. So maybe we go with this. Okay. This is a really good card. We're becoming very defensive, which is fine for the Defect. One of the strategies that the Defect has is definitely go all in on defense and let your orbs do the work for you, and you don't have to use strikes nearly as much. So that could be good. Let's take a look at that card real quick. So auto shields, if you have no block, gain 11 block. So this is a really good pay 1 energy to defend some damage coming in, and don't pay a bunch of energy for other block cards. So as long as we have no block when we play this, we get 11. Otherwise it's unplayable basically. But 11 is a lot for 1 energy, and it's going to show up as a MVP in this early game in terms of just mitigating damage. So, all right, the choices here. We could play double defend strike. We could play triple strike for 18, or we could play 12 and 5. I actually like conserving the health here. We are going to get a little bit of extra damage from this, but one of the downsides of the Jawworm is they continually buff in between attacks, and they can get a little out of hand if you don't finish the fight too quickly. I think we'll be fine taking 10 block this turn and getting their health down to a little bit more meaningful or easily reachable number here. Remember, our max damage at a turn right now is something like 18, maybe I guess 21 with our lightning strike. So go for the eyes feels really good here, and it's free to play. So notice the yellow border indicating the target. There's an active attacking target, so you're going to get that bonus. This is a situation where either the auto shields or the defend is good enough since we played the weakness, but we can go ahead and play that to absorb the rest of the block. And then we can generate an orb and evoke an orb for a good chunk of damage, which is going to bring him down to 9, which is a very manageable turn for us. And so far we've only taken 1 point of damage. Alright. We definitely have lethal here, so we'll go 3 and 6 and 6. Didn't even need our orb this time. Our first potion, vulnerable. Vulnerable is not going to be super helpful for us. We don't have a lot of attack cards, and they're not very good ones. But it's still more damage in a pinch when we need to make sure we kill something on a particular turn. And some excellent picks again. This would be our second claw if we had gone with the claw earlier, which makes claw much more impactful because you're playing it 2 times every time you cycle your deck. So both cards benefit each other when that happens, and you're growing the stats a lot more quickly. The larger your deck gets, the worse claw becomes, because it takes longer to cycle the claws, but there are ways to get them back in your hand after you've played them, so it's not quite 100% true of that. A big deck can't use claws effectively, but you definitely have to have the right synergies to make it work. Boot Sequence, an innate card, which means it starts in our hand, gain 10 block, and exhaust. This is good for really early aggressive fights where the enemy starts swinging right away, and they don't usually set up. So this can just save us a lot of health. It is an exhausted card, which means it doesn't come back around, unfortunately. And then Melter. Melter is amazing in certain fights. If you get it in a couple particular fights, it absolutely claps. Any fights where the enemy is building up a lot of block, this can just completely turn that fight in your favor. And I think if you pay attention, the artwork demonstrates exactly which target this card works best on. There's no guarantees that we will run into that guy anytime in our run, but there's always probably 1 or 2 guys that this card's going to be really good for. More importantly than that, though, this is a 1 energy 10 damage attack. That's almost as good as 2 strikes, and if we remove any block, it's basically better than 2 strikes. So this is just straight up, even without the block removal, a good card, an energy efficient card, at least in the early game. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pick up a Melter just so we have it in our back pocket in case we run into one of those fools that likes to block. Alright. Well, this is an interesting chance to show off the Melter. Is that going to be enough? 3... Yeah, it's only going to be like 13. Well, that's kind of unfortunate, but I could go Strike Melter. That's going to be enough. Okay, so we've got Strike Melter for the front one, and we'll demonstrate how the block removal works. We've got Go for the Eyes on the second one, just to get the weakness applied primarily. And we've got Auto Shield for the block. So I think this is our turn. Now, it's important that we play this in the right order. This creature, Louse, has no block currently, but after we swing with the strike, he's going to generate some block. This would typically put him out of reach of our damage. For example, if we had another strike in hand, this isn't going to be enough to even get through the block. But because we have Melter in hand, we're going to remove all of his block and deal 10 damage to his remaining 8 health, which is going to be lethal. Then we go for the eyes here. That's going to trigger his block. We don't really care. We just wanted to get it triggered so that we don't have to mess with it next turn. Play the auto shields, and now that block falls off, and we only have 11 health to deal with. Unfortunately, our zap wasn't enough to get through the block, so no damage from that, but that's perfectly fine. We're only looking for 11 points of damage, and we can get 16 by evoking our orb. So far, a pretty clean run. Ooh, okay. 3 cards that I would really like to have in my deck. So let's talk about each one. First of all, the Rebound. Rebound is a really cool card. It's deck manipulation or position manipulation. This is a card that allows you to play another card and then put it back on your draw pile instead of your discard pile. This has a lot of really cool synergy. Specifically with cards like Zap, you can play a Rebound, then play Zap, put it on top of your deck, and either draw it or draw it in the next turn with draw mechanics. If you don't have any, you wait till your next turn and play it again. And that allows you to fill up your orbs a little bit faster. You could also play it with things like Claw, and that allows you to proc the Claw more frequently than just cycling your deck would normally allow. And even a really good defensive card can be played like Auto Shields to basically play it over and over and over again if you have enough of those rebounds in your hand. So you play one, bounce the shields, play it again the next turn. If you have another one, you can do it again. So Rebound, having a couple of rebounds in your deck can really give your best cards a chance to shine more frequently. Genetic Algorithm is an amazing card. It doesn't look very good on the surface. Gain 1 block, permanently increase this card's block by 2, and then exhaust. That doesn't seem great. However, the number of fights that this game produces, if you get this early, this can become a significantly huge block. And if you can get it in your hand on the right turn, you can block a massive amount. Very similar to like the 40 plus block that we were seeing with some of the best cards in the Ironclad's deck. It is only a one-time use, but it's still good enough in many cases. And there are certain interactions in the game, relics and whatnot, that might allow this to stick around for more than one use, despite the exhaust tag. So I really like this as a defensive option, especially this early in the game. And then finally, Ball Lightning is slightly better than a Strike. It also channels a Lightning Orb that can cause other Lightning Orbs to then be evoked. And at the surface, it's basically 10 damage, but 3 of it is going to hit a random target. And then that 3 damage will actually cycle every turn after that, so it's potentially a lot more than 3 damage. So Ball Lightning, pretty good upside. Feels a lot like the Poison Stab from the Silence card. Potentially really high damage output for 1 energy, but it's a slow card. It takes a long time for that to really see gains. Right now, our deck has a pretty good couple of block cards between the weakness and the auto shields. So I think we're going to pass on this, even though it's the one I really want to take. I think the one that we really want is the Ball Lightning, because we want to show off the orb mechanic more. And the best way to do that is to have more ways to generate orbs. So we're going to go ahead and pick this up. This is a pretty solid card. Not bad at all. We already removed a Strike, so having a better card to replace it feels good. The Golden Idol. Enemies drop more gold. Trigger a trap. This feels really spicy here. We already chose a path that's not going to have a merchant in Act 1, which means our first merchant is going to be in Act 2. Act 2 merchants have better cards to buy. They are often more expensive than the cards that you see in Act 1. So as long as we get enough fights in Act 1, we'll get enough cards to form a solid foundation to our deck. This could allow us to pick up a superstar, expensive rare card maybe, or even a really, really good relic right off the clip in Act 2. I like it. I think we're going to go ahead and roll the dice on the trap. Very interesting. So we can pick up an injury This is an unplayable curse card. We don't have any positive curse interactions in our deck, so it's kind of meh. And it does just cause issues with our draw. So that's probably not the best pick for the situation that we're in. Also, we're not heading anywhere near a merchant where we could remove this if we really wanted to. Smash, take 20 damage. Taking 20 damage right before an elite fight might not be the best thing to do. I think we'll have a good chance of beating this elite, but we are kind of a little more defensive than I'd like to be going into an elite fight. And so I'm not sure I like the idea of taking 20 damage. But we could lose 6 max hit points. This basically puts us back to even. So we started at 75, we gained 7 from our boon at the beginning of the game. This basically just offsets our boon. And that might be the best pick here. Obviously, the best pick, if we can manage it, is probably just take the 20 damage. Because if we manage to get through this act with the 20 damage, then we go into Act 2 with all of the bonus hit points still in our back pocket. Can we do that successfully? We have 2 campfires. I'd rather not heal at those before the boss. We have 1 at the boss for a total of 3. So we have 3 opportunities to heal off that 20 damage. We're going to take some damage from this elite. Let's say we take another 20. That puts us at 40. We're going to take another 20 from the other elite. That puts us at 20. And if we have a bad fight, it could be even worse than that. I think that's too risky. I think that's too risky. I'm going to go with this. We'll find out if it was too risky or not. Alright, I definitely want to smith here. And the main thing we're looking for is we want to increase our damage output. That's a +4 to our damage output. That's a +3. Auto shields +5 to block. I like that a lot too. Go for the eyes. 2 weak and 4 damage. The 2 turns of weakness could be really helpful here. And then obviously making these 0 cost. Gets more of our strikes in play. Gets more melters and ball lightnings with those strikes in play. I think just from a pure damage perspective, it's got to be melter. It's just more energy or more damage per energy than anything else that we could do. This would also feel really good because when we draw this with other strike cards, we basically don't have to worry about spending the energy. But I think it's Melter just for the damage potential. And then hopefully we draw Melter on the perfect turn. Ooh. Okay, well, this is actually one of the toughest fights for the Defect, especially if you do not have AoE damage, and we don't have any of our AoE attacks, AoE cards yet. So this could be a really sketchy fight for us. This is a fight that could be so sketchy, I'm actually tempted to throw the vulnerable potion out on turn 1, strictly because we have 1, 2, 3 attacks in hand, and we can maximize our damage on turn 1. We're going to take 9, but I already knew we were going to take damage. The thing is, if we don't get rid of one of these outside guys like immediately, then we're taking 18 every other turn. And we just cannot block 18 points of damage reliably. 9 I can kind of get by occasionally by just throwing a defend out to reduce it, or putting a weakness on it, or getting our auto shields up. But there's nothing we really have that gets 18 points of damage blocked. The longer this fight goes, the worse it gets for us because of all the delirium cards we end up with. So yeah, I think we're going to go for it. We're going to try to clear this one as fast as possible. Also need to remember they have artifacts. That means our first weakness is going to be a problem because it's not going to trigger. So now that we've cleared the weakness here, our potion is gone, which sucks. And I totally misplayed that. We should have waited to play the potion until we had the weakness card. Now we can play weakness on this card, so it's not the end of the world, but yeah. I was thinking totally about the weakness getting canceled and totally forgot that the potion was going to do the same thing. Either way, let's go ahead and get as much damage in as we can. One of the problems with this fight is that despite the fact that we're going to have good damage output from these orbs, they're random targets, and so we can't direct it. So that becomes a problem with this many enemies. When you're dealing with 1 or 2 enemies, the odds are you're going to hit them, the one that you want, more often. But with 3, it's a little harder. Ideally, we get 2 strikes on him and get him down to 6, and then a single strike removes him next turn. That would be the best case scenario. Strike and go for the eyes is also good here, which we did happen to land, so that's excellent. Is there any way that we could save to go for the eyes? So optimally, what we could do is strike, zap, auto shields. Go for the eyes here. And then we have 3 chances to deal the final 3 points of damage. But if we fail to hit one of those 3 lightning strikes on him, we're taking an extra 7-ish damage than we normally would have. The safer way to do this is to just strike and go for the eyes here. The auto shields blocks all of this anyways, so that's probably what we do. Get him off the field. Auto shields all the damage, and then 9 damage split between these 2 guys. Alright. So this is a pretty solid hand. We could get a good amount of damage down. The unfortunate part is we don't know what the best target's going to be. So let's save our strikes for a moment and let's go ahead and dual cast. This is going to put 16 damage and it split it. I only have 12 in hand. So we don't have enough for lethal. So I think what we do here is throw out a defend, and then it's either strike or zap. As long as we're confident we're going to get at least 2 turns out of this, this is equal to a strike in damage output. And if we get 3 or more turns out of this orb, it's more than a strike. So let's go ahead and do that, because I don't think we're killing this last one next turn, even with a strike on him. Alright, we need 3 strikes in hand or equivalent. Melter, go for the eyes it is. just shy by 1 point. But it does set up lethal for any one of those. The other option here is... Actually, we don't even need to worry about it because Go for the Eyes is free. We block the 9, set him up for lethal, and hope that one of these strikes finishes him off. Perfect. Block all of that. Okay, so we got the auto shields on a bad turn, but at least we did get a strike. And this is one of the advantages that the Defect has. When we get a really bad draw and we can't do a lot, our orbs are still going to consistently provide whatever we set them up to provide. So even though we can't do anything with the cards we drew, we're going to get 9 damage on this last enemy. Which essentially sets him up for lethal next turn, because next turn we do 9 more. So it's very reliable damage over time once you get all your orbs in place. If only the boot worked in conjunction with orbs, this would be quite amazing. Unfortunately, it only works with unblocked attack damage, and I don't think it triggers on orb damage. So, Speed Potion gives us a nice boost to our dex for a turn. Alright, 3 new choices to look at. We have Charge Battery. Charge Battery is basically block plus. So our normal block is, or defend plus, gain 5 block. This is gain 7 block for the same amount of energy. And then it also produces an extra energy the following turn. This can help set up bigger plays or help us add more expensive cards to our deck and play them more reliably. Skim is pretty self-explanatory. Draw 3 cards. These two work well together. Obviously, drawing cards means more opportunities to spend energy, and if you have more energy, that could be very helpful. And finally, Sweeping Beam deals 6 damage to all enemies, draw 1 card. This is just a really good AoE card. The damage is a little bit low for an AoE card. The upgraded version is a little bit better, but it also provides some card draw. And card draw is really helpful when you have a lot of zero cost cards in your deck, like claws and other things of that nature. Getting our zap upgraded would make a really great zero cost card that we could draw into. And so I really like Sweeping Beam a lot. It's definitely one of my MVPs. And upgraded, it's significantly better than a strike. I feel like we're very defensive right now. I don't feel like Skim does enough for us. The main advantage of Skim is we get a cycle back to zap more, but not having AoE at all in our deck definitely feels wrong. So we're going to pick up that. The best part is we have an opportunity to immediately upgrade it to the plus form, which is much better play in most cases. Getting 9 damage on a whole bunch of little enemies that we could run into later on sets all of them up for lethal with the zap from a lightning orb. I'm thinking of the little blobs and the little gremlins that we sometimes run into. Also makes this a lethal attack on many enemies. I'm not sure we have a better play. Getting auto shields to 15 feels pretty good too, but I think this just, since we only have 1 copy of it, we want it, whenever it does go off, to be very impactful. Dreamcatcher. Whenever we rest, we can add a card to our deck. That makes taking a rest a little bit more manageable. Don't feel like you're missing out entirely. We got through that last fight pretty clean too, so maybe taking the 20 damage was the right call. If I had had the Dreamcatcher before we had to make that decision, would I have gone the other road? I would have probably gone the other road. It was very close. I'm just thinking that some of the elites can really be a problem for the Defect because he takes too long to set up his prolonged damage with the orbs. And if you don't have enough high damage cards in hand early, you just can't outrace them without taking a lot of damage. So having this option to use our rest sites to heal and get a card feels a lot better, even though we miss out on the upgrade, obviously. Looking at the oncoming attacks, we've got enough to block all 10, at least for this turn. We also have enough to add another lightning orb or to dual cast our current lightning orb. This fight is really all about killing the thief before he runs away with your gold. So that means we want as much directed damage as possible, not random damage. Which means I think that going this route instead of this route is probably the better play. And then do we block all of this or just half of it? I think we're just going to block half of it. And then see what our orbs do. 29. Auto shields would feel pretty good here. We did get auto shields. Go for the eyes is free. Auto shields, despite being debuffed with frail, is still enough to get a full block for the turn. And we have 2 attacks. Now again, direct damage is more important here than AoE damage that we can't direct, so we're going to go for the 2 strikes and hopefully guarantee lethal on this guy next turn, and then we can deal with the slime at our leisure. That way we don't lose all the lovely gold we've been collecting. Oh, this is a perfect setup here for Sweeping Beam. That upgraded version hits for exactly 9. So we're going to go ahead and throw that out for sure. And now, our dual cast, because there's only one target, we know where that damage is going. 16 damage on the blob. Finishes him off. More money. And 2 really interesting cards. We've already seen Sweeping Blades, or Sweeping Beam. We're not going to talk about that, but we are going to talk about Self-Repair and Chill. Self-Repair is a power card. When you play it, it gets consumed, and you'll get a little status symbol underneath your health bar that states, at the end of this combat, heal 7. So it works kind of like the Ironclad starting relic, but it's a card, and you have to play it. This is a card that slows down your defenses and your attacks, but once it's in play, it automatically will heal you for 7 or 10. This helps us avoid having to heal at rest sites. So it could be really good, and again, if we had had this card in hand, before we had to make the choice earlier about taking 20 damage or losing 6 permanent health, max health, I probably would have gone for take the 20 damage, but we didn't have this in hand yet, and so that made it scarier. Because we have Dreamcatcher at the moment, I don't know that this is super important. But let's see if we can make a case for Chill. So Chill is a interesting card. It channels one Frost Orb for each enemy in combat. Frost Orbs are kind of like the defensive equivalent of Lightning Orbs. They generate block every single turn for you. And they can generate a lot of block depending on certain other cards and combinations of cards that you have, which makes them a really interesting choice. The other thing about Chill that's really cool is the upgrade makes it innate, and that means it starts in your opening hand. This essentially in combats like where you have 3 or more enemies, you can basically generate a whole bunch of Frost Orbs and fill up all your orbs right away. And that can make you very, very tanky for the beginning of the fight. That definitely has some value. Having a second Sweeping Beam that's unupgraded wouldn't be the end of the world. It's a good attack card. I'm kind of leaning towards the self-repair. We're not going to see a ton of value out of it this act, I don't think. But going into Act 2, having some healing that is not from rest sites might be the way to go. I feel like we have enough defensive cards right now. And Chill's an okay defensive card, but unless you have more synergies with the Frost Orbs, which we don't just yet, I think self-repair's the pick here. Okay. Among the stones and boulders, you notice an intricate blue statue resembling a wing. Gold spilling out of the cracks. There must be more inside. We can remove a card from our deck and lose 7 health. That would be pretty easy to replace with the card we just picked up. Or we could just gain some more money. And like I said, I really want to be rich going into Act 2 for our first merchant. So let's do that. Pile of gold. Alright, I feel like we're in a really good position to take on this elite. And if we have to use Dreamcatcher at the end, it won't feel nearly as bad. Alright, Blobby Boy is a very interesting fight. We've seen some very bad and very good fights with him. The way that we're going to deal with this is basically at 32, 33 hit points, he's going to split. So we want to get him like down to 35 if possible, somewhere around 35. And then get a hand of all offensive cards and just unload on him. This might be a good time to play our Dexterity Potion. Play Melter. Yeah. This is a big attack for him on turn 1. We haven't seen a potion in quite a while, so I think something like this feels okay. So that was 14. 17. 12 damage here would feel pretty good. This feels kind of bad because we didn't get any attack cards this turn. But we can go ahead and go for the eyes. 3 puts him at 40. Another 3 puts him at 37. And we can just end the turn here. Alright, so depending on what he does this turn, we may or may not want to attack him. We have to attack him, actually, because our orbs are going to split him whether we want to or not. So, as soon as we end the turn, he takes 6 damage. That puts him at 31. That's going to be below half health. Whatever his current activity is will change to split. And so what we would prefer to do is on the turn that we know he's going to pass the split threshold, which we know is this turn, we want to deal the maximum amount of damage that we possibly can and set us up for the next turn. So this is 16 damage. This is 5 plus 3. That's 8 damage. This is 6 damage and draw a card. And this is 4 damage. So it's looking like dual cast into lightning ball into sweeping beam is our best bet. Having sweeping beam for next turn would be really nice. The good news is our draw pile's empty, which means our next hand is going to be shuffled. So there's a chance that any one of or all of these cards could be back in our hand. But I think we're definitely going to dual cast. And I think we're definitely going to do this. And then we're definitely going to hit him for 6 more, which puts him at 10. So now the question is... Sweeping Beam for 6. And then another 6. And then he's at like 4 when he splits, and then each enemy is basically dead. I would have liked to get the self-repair off, but this is guaranteed lethal, essentially, without a really horrible draw. Well, which we managed to kind of produce, but it's fine. Alright. Card reward time. Some pretty mediocre cards. Nothing's really standing out as amazing in the deck that we're building currently. Streamline's one of those cards that in a long boss fight could be an MVP. Starts out at 15 for 2, which is roughly 7 per energy, so it's slightly better than a strike energy wise, but each time you play it you reduce its cost by 1, and so playing this 2 times, maybe using something like a rebound, gets it down to 0. And then the upgrade is quite substantial, 5 points of damage upgraded, so this is a high priority for upgrading if it is in your deck because of just the sheer number of stats that it gets. And 20 damage for 0 throughout a boss fight can really feel pretty solid. Barrage deals 4 damage for each channeled orb. Right now the max would be 3, so 3 times 4 is 12. This is a 12 for 1 that requires setup. The interesting thing is, once we get into Act 2, we're going to start seeing more cards that produce more orbs. There's some relics, there's some potions, there's a lot of things that produce extra orbs. And so this can get really beefy with the right combination of synergies. Synergizes very well with strength, so any kind of a strength potion or strength buffing card that we end up with. And it synergizes very well with any cards that produce and help fill orbs. At the moment, it's kind of mediocre, but in the right deck, it can be an all-star. Leap is just a good block card. It's a lot like Auto Shields, but it's not as restrictive. You can play this with other block cards and it doesn't matter. Auto Shields can only be played by itself. Again, +3, so just pretty typical for an upgrade. Nothing amazing, but nothing terrible. Thinking about our deck and our last few picks, we've got defense, attack, 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 power. I think a defense card is probably warranted here, even though this is not a spicy pick. I think it's probably a good idea to have another good block card. Alright, and now for the big decision. Do we have enough health at 58 to take on a second elite and another fight to get to a healing place if we need to? Let's assume this fight goes perfect. Let's assume we have 51 health or something like that. Going into this campfire, maybe 48, 49 health. Is 49 health enough to fight this? And the answer is probably. Which means we could upgrade. Which means maybe we're looking at self-repair. Maybe we're looking at auto shield. Maybe we're looking at zap. But I think this is the right call if we want to have a successful run. Ooh, spicy, spicy. Okay. So this enemy we've talked about before has a weird sleeping defensive behavior where he allows you a certain number of turns to set up, which means you can, at this point in the game especially, you can basically cycle your entire deck once without having to fight him. If you have setup cards, that might be the most preferable way to play this. And we actually do have a couple of setup cards, and thankfully we got them in our opening hand. So self-repair and zap are pretty bad plays when the enemy's like fighting you and stuff. But right now, since he's not, we can actually play these for free. And as long as we don't generate enough orbs to break his shell, he won't wake up. So even though he's going to get hit by this lightning orb between rounds, if it doesn't break the 8 damage, he does not wake up. So that's an important detail. What other cards would we want for setting up? I think the only other card that really helps us set up is going to be Melter. If we can open up the fight with Melter and 2 other attack cards, that would be ideal. So Melter plus 2 attack cards in hand is going to be the best turn to actually start fighting this. We don't want to hit him with anything else. We can just end our turn. And he'll stay asleep. Generate a shield. This is actually perfect for us because we're basically guaranteed to get Melter in our next hand. We have a 1 in 6 chance of not getting the Melter. He's about to wake up. And so what happens is, if you go through this cycle too many times, he'll wake up on his own, and he won't be stunned the first time that he wakes up. So you definitely want to initiate the fight before he wakes up. because the first turn he's stunned and does nothing in response. We actually didn't get the perfect hand. The perfect hand would have been the ball lightning. But it doesn't matter because Sweeping Beam lets us draw into it. So it actually is the perfect hand. So we're going to start with... I almost goofed up. I said we're going to start with this. No. We're going to start with Melter. Melter's going to break the armor for us, which means all 14 of our attack go through. And that means all the rest of our attack damage also goes through. And that also means that all of our lightning orb damage also goes through. So this is one of those fights where Melter, if you open with it, is like ideal. We'll go ahead and apply weakness. Sweeping Beam, draw into our lightning ball, set up all of our lightning orbs, and roughly 20% of his health. That's a pretty good start to this fight. Let's see how we do. Now, Melter is just a good energy efficient attack from here on out. Generally, the thing about this fight that can really get obnoxious is if you start trying to block too much, he'll get to a point after, I think, the third round where he starts debuffing you, and he makes it harder to block and harder to deal damage. The better play is almost always to just get as much damage in as fast as possible. Our 3 highest damage cards are all in hand. We're going to play all of them. We're going to start with the dual cast. It's going to absorb one of our orbs, but that's okay. It did more damage in that little burst than 6 turns or 5 turns of orbs ticking on their own would have done. So losing that one orb is fine. The next play we're going to do is Sweeping Beam, just to see what we draw. You should always play a card that draws a card when you have energy left over. Never play it as your last card, because sometimes it'll draw something that you then can't play at all, and you're really going to be sad. So always try to play these early in your turn. Okay, it's just a strike, no big deal. We'll play the Melter, and we are set up for a lethal next turn. We are going to take a big hit, but that's okay. We're down to 40. All right, go for the eyes is good here. This is a situation where we're guaranteed 12 damage next turn. We don't need to take any damage this turn. And actually, this is lethal, so we don't even need to worry. That was beautifully done. I'm glad I was able to show that to you guys. That was probably the best combat I've ever had against that particular elite, just in terms of how everything worked out as perfectly as I think it possibly could have. We also got a potion, so that was good, and a strawberry, which gives us more max health. So the health is given and it's taken away and it's given again. So now we're back up to 83. We got a block potion, very helpful in the early part of our turn. We got 2 new cards to look at. Reinforced Body gains 7 block X times. Typically that's going to be 21 after the boss, and in Act 2 could be 28. Generating 28 block in a turn, usually a bad thing. However, if that's your whole turn, I should say. However, if you had 4 energy and you generated 28 block, and that got you through the turn, and you already had all your orbs set up, you're still doing damage. And that is the value of defensive cards on the Defect. If your orbs are set up, you could play a lot of defensive cards and still just start whittling away at the enemy over time. So they can play a little bit more defensively if they have the right setup. The problem is it takes cards to get that setup in place, and so this at the wrong time in hand, it feels pretty bad. The upgrade is 9 block, which is quite substantial and can get up to like 27 or 36 or even higher. And it feels a lot better upgraded. Even if you just play it for 1 energy, a 1 for 9 is pretty solid compared to 1 for 5 that we start with. Barrage we talked about. Overclock. Draw 2 cards. Add a burn into your discard pile. This is just card draw with a slight status effect later on. It does go to your discard pile, so depending on when you play this, you won't see the burn for a while, but it does kind of suck, and playing this too many times can start to really hurt you. However, drawing 3 cards for a burn feels a little bit better. I think the best play here is going to be the reinforced body. I mean, we did just take leap though. And we kind of want to cycle our cards faster. One way to get better cards in your hand is just cycle your deck faster. The problem is we don't really have any good answers or synergy with the burn card. I know there are some that exist, and we would have to look for them if we took it. But this is like, Skim feels like a better fit for our deck. If we ran into a Skim, I would definitely consider that. I think I am going to go for a reinforced body. Alright, one more fight, a campfire, and the boss. This shouldn't be a very difficult fight for us. Melter Strike. And then we just block 7. Not the best opening turn, but it's exactly 12. And we get the 7 heal off. I think I'm going to use that here because it allows us to set up for a really good lethal next turn and basically take no damage.
Heal.
We got a strength potion. Alright. I can't remember if we've seen Cold Snap before. I think we did. So this would generate a Frost Orb for us. But I'm really liking the idea of a loop. So at the start of your turn, trigger the passive ability on your next orb. It should kind of say on your first orb, but basically the orb in the front of the stack gets triggered an additional time. So normally, you trigger boom, 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 then they take their turn, and then you have your turn. What would happen in this case is it'd go boom, 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 they take their turn, and then when it comes back to our turn, before we do anything, the front orb goes off one more time. And these stack, so if you have more than one loop in play, each loop will trigger the front orb an additional time. So this is just 3 damage basically every turn, as long as you have one orb in play. I like a loop. Because we got our heal off I don't really feel the need to rest here. 24 health would basically overheal us anyways. And I think there's enough options for upgrading that we don't need to. The real question is, what's going to be the most impactful upgrade that we can have? Looping for 6 damage every single turn feels pretty solid. Having the weak roll over to the following turn would also feel pretty good and would make this card even more valuable. Again, this is the fight where we don't care if we take damage to our health so much. Winning with 1 hit point is like winning with all of them. But not getting enough damage in play is like death. Ugh. The one downside to loop that I didn't really think about is the damage for all of our lightning orbs and for Loop's lightning strikes are random. And we are fighting the slime boss, which means we could get a really bad damage scenario where we cross the threshold of a split at the wrong time. And so we might have to consider playing around that a little bit. But I think Loop Plus feels pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and get the strength. Not the most ideal opening turn. So our first threshold is 70, so we want to get him as close to 70 as possible and then exceed it as much as possible for the first split. Getting there I don't think is going to be the issue. It's going to be getting there without pushing it too far. This is an absolutely horrific hand on a turn we really want to be doing damage. How close can we get him to 70? We've got 9, 10, 11, 12, 38. That's far too much. So this is 9, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 12. And 8 is 20 exactly. Okay. This is 16. Yeah. So 12 and 8 is too much. It causes him to go out of... So I think we're going to have to break him here. The strength potion is actually screwing me by 1 point of damage, which is quite humorous. We have a guaranteed 9. Wait. This is 9. But 2 of it doesn't trigger till after his turn. Okay. No, this is fine. I gotta make sure I think about this correctly, because the order of operations is critical for this particular fight. So if I do 16, and I play nothing else, and I hit him for 3, that's 19. That keeps him 1 above the threshold for splitting. Then he attacks us for 35. We take the big hit, but we don't care. Then, on my next turn, we hit him for 6. Okay. This is like perfect math, right? Yeah, so it's just 16. And then auto shield. And then because we played auto shield first, I can still play the second defect. And now we set him up for the split. That hurt, but that's fine. He's already interrupted his attack or whatever he was going to do for the split. Now, let's get as much damage as possible before the split. First card to play is Sweeping Beam for 11, and we draw 1. Okay, not helpful. The Strike and the Zap would be the most damage. We don't care about self-repair because we're going to repair anyways. So yeah. Now he splits at 40 instead of at 70. Alright, same thing with these 2 nerds. The problem is now we can't reliably predict where these are going to go. So one of the things that we do is possibly just try to keep the damage even on them until the next split. And they both split at 20. So if he gets tagged twice, he's going to split. He's going to split, so that's the one we're going to focus next turn. Alright, our AoE attack is perfect draw here. It is not in our deck. But we have 1 card on the reshuffle. Nope. Go for the Eyes is perfect kill on that. Zap is played for free. 6 is a kill on that. Go. Alright. We're about an hour and 30 minutes in, so pretty much the same time as usual. And a lot of gold. Look at this. 500 gold. Our final reward. Biased Cognition. Biased Cognition is a very powerful card, but it has a downside. Biased Cognition gives you +4 focus. Focus is a statistic which is not easily available, but essentially what it is it's a buff to the orb's non-evoked and evoked state. So +4 focus pushes all of these from 3 to 7. The downside is, at the beginning of each turn after we play it, our focus drops by 1, and it can actually go negative. And it can get to the point where all of our orbs are at 0. So it's kind of like a play this and win, or eventually run out of all power. I've had it play very important roles in my victories. I've also had it cause me to lose a fight when I couldn't quite have enough gas to finish, and then all of my orbs are like producing no damage or no block or no anything, because the focus depletion has gone to 0. Very interesting card. A Hyper Beam is an extremely powerful AoE attack, but it costs focus, and there are limited ways to regain your focus throughout a fight. There are things like Biased Cog that can fill it back up or give you more. But without it, this basically turns all your orbs off after you use it, and you no longer have any orb power. Multicast is like a super version of our dual cast. And the best part is you can play it for free once it's upgraded. No energy cost because of the X+1. The downside is if you don't have enough orbs to refill your bar on the regular, this starts consuming them almost too quickly for you to keep up with. But it does provide very good opportunities for like straight up lethal turns, especially when you're down to 1 enemy, because you can predict the damage. This is probably the best card in terms of just general reliability and damage output with our current setup. This definitely could be interesting and could make climbing to the boss much easier because it's stronger in short fights. The longer the fights go, the worse this card gets. Having more than one copy of it definitely makes it less of a liability, because once it gets like really low, you can play the other copy and extend your effectiveness out longer. I think the obvious pick for us, though, is going to be the multicast. And then our chest reward. What do we got? Ooh. No longer rest at rest sites with the coffee dripper. Or we no longer smith at rest sites. Runic Dome, no longer see enemies in tents. This is again not a good one for me to demonstrate the game. It changes a really core mechanic of the game. If you're really experienced, or if you have a deck that just doesn't care what the opponent's doing, this can be pretty solid, but it's not for us. I think the Fusion Hammer is definitely the pick here, and the reason I say that is we have a relic that makes the other option okay. And so moving into Act 2, we can just path to fewer rest sites And when we do path to a rest site, it's specifically to pick a new card up and to heal, as opposed to upgrade cards. And the more cards we get a look at, the more chances we get to pick up upgraded cards or strong cards that are going to be good in our deck. But from here on out, we're kind of limited to only picking up cards that are either really good in their native form or are already upgraded. We're going to pass on a lot of other cards if we go with the Fusion Hammer. And then, like, specifically in our deck, we're never going to be able to upgrade Zap, at least at a rest site. Dual cast, go for the eyes, auto shields not being upcast. Like, we're definitely hindering ourselves in certain ways. But I don't see this. Well, let me think about that. With the auto heal, do we need rest sites? I mean, I know we have the Dreamcatcher, but do we need rest sites? I think that's going to be a question for next video. I'm going to take the time to sort of decide what I want to pick before next time, and I'll make that decision at the beginning of next video. Because I could see a case for either we take this and we don't care about smithing, and we just pick up more cards, or we take this and we don't care about healing and we just use auto heal and upgrade it immediately and try to get it off as many times as we can. I think they both have merit, and I wish I knew kind of what our what the next act looked like, but we can't see that till we pick. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the video for today. I hope you're enjoying the series. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section, and I will try to get to them as quickly as I can. I'm always looking to improve in these types of games, but I don't claim to be a high level, high tier, high ascension player. I think I've climbed to ascension 3 on most of the classes at this point, and am continuing to learn and build my knowledge of the game. So if you have anything that I'm missing, or you see any plays that would be better, I would really appreciate you sharing them. Other than that, enjoy the series. We're going to go through a normal play with each of the characters, and then if I don't achieve a victory, we'll probably come back to that character at some point and try again. But I'm going to try to cycle through, and then depending on the popularity of the series, maybe even go into climbing the ascensions and the higher difficulties, or doing a run at the heart where we collect the 3 keys and try to take on the final boss of the game. But for this run, we're just trying to get through the Spire. So until next time, this has been the Nose Plays, and you guys have a wonderful day.